This is Walter Lilius, who was born on Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, 1941, and grew up in Westminster, Massachusetts. In 1963, he received a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. For the next 4 years, he was an Air Force officer doing training for the Air Training Command. Following that, he worked for the Army Management Engineering College on the Rock Island Arsenal, doing training, research, and consulting throughout the federal government. In 1998, he took an early retirement and with some business associates, started the company Interactive Technologies Group, or ITG. Now retired from ITG, Walter is devoting much of his energy to a variety of restoration and preservation projects. Walter and his wife Ann have 5 grown children and are currently parenting 2 of their grandchildren. Hats off to you. Walter and Ann are members of the Rock Island Preservation Society, the Rock Island County Historical Society, and are board members of the Moline Preservation Society. So we'll welcome Walter.
Talk about Henry Pope. Who is he? Well, he's not a famous person, so what's interesting about him? What's interesting is that his mother kept a diary from the time that he was born until he turned 21. So his childhood years are well documented. And his childhood years were over 100 years ago, so we can compare them to those of a child growing up today. And since he grew up here in Moline, many of us can relate to his experiences. Now, why am I the one to be telling Henry's story? Well, one reason is that I happen to live in the house where Henry grew up. It's the house you see circled here, behind and to the right of Ellendale. The other reason is that I've been swapping historical information with Henry's grandson for a few years. Now, as I was putting this story together, I realized that the storytelling would be more straightforward if Henry were to tell the story himself. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to become Henry. Just a moment. Now, let's get started with the first real entry in my diary. This takes place while we were living in St. Louis. My mother writes, Henry Patterson Pope, born December 16th, 1883, Sunday, 2:15 a.m. Dr. Schott and Mrs. C.M. Burke with me. Mrs. B. stayed with me 6 weeks. I had a frightful time, and Henry was a little starved-looking baby weighing 6 pounds. Well, that's not a very reassuring start, is it? I guess this would be a good place for me to introduce my parents. My father was Charles Henry Pope. He was born in 1849 and graduated from Yale with a degree in civil engineering. At the time of my birth, he was manager of the Deere Mansour Company, St. Louis branch. And he was by nature an entrepreneur. He was a natural visionary, anticipating those things people would want and need in future years. My mother was Sarah Margaret Baxter Pope. She was 2 years younger than my father, and she was the author of my diary. While she kept up the diary for 21 years, there are some long periods of time with no entries. And at the other extreme, some days have multiple entries. In most cases, the entries are very brief, so a week-long activity might be documented in just 1 sentence. Now, in most cases from this point on, I won't be showing actual pictures of the diary, but instead will be representing the diary with a yellow background. And we're certainly not going to look at every diary entry, only some of the more interesting ones. Let's start here. Mother writes, Papa and I had him in Gamble Park about 6 p.m. he had a sinking spell, and we thought he was dead. Telephoned for Dr. Kershaw and brought him around. Gave us a terrible scare. Now, other than the fact that I wasn't dead, you notice anything unusual here?
Telephone.
Telephone, yeah. Very few people had telephones back in 1884. They'd only been invented 8 years earlier. We had one in our house because of Father's work. He often needed to contact the main office in Moline, and the telephone was an effective way of doing that. Now, I find it amazing that here we are 130 years later, and you're still using the same basic telephone system. Admittedly, it's greatly refined, and it's good to know that the technology has finally moved on to the point that you have to call the old phones landlines to distinguish them from your newer cell phones. Now, what's next? Well, here's a studio photo of me when I'm 6 months old. Not very cheerful looking, am I? In 1886, when I'm two years old, there were no diary entries, and for that matter, there's little of interest in 1885 or 1887 or 1888, mainly stuff about teeth coming in and gaining weight. Now, in 1889, when I'm 5 years old, I now have two younger brothers, Gene and Charlie. And I'm finally looking a lot healthier. This looks like a color photograph, but it's not. As many of you would recognize, this is a hand-tinted photograph. This is a technique that was used well into the 20th century. Mother writes, October 4th, 1899, moved to Moline, Illinois. We came up from St. Louis on a passenger train similar to this one. Train was a great way to travel, and there were lots of routes available. Now keep in mind that at this time, there was no other mode of transportation that could compete with the train. And when you go somewhere by train today, the odds are still pretty good that you'll travel on a railroad route that dates back to at least 1890. Now, my father had traveled to Moline many times before on Deere and Company business. The Keeter House Hotel was practically across the street from the company headquarters. And it was a well-run place that catered to businessmen, so my father almost always stayed there. So it was a logical place for us to stay while we were new in town. This picture shows what the hotel looked like while there was some sort of a street fair going on. Now, I need to tell you a little bit about German Keeter, the builder and owner of the Keeter House Hotel, since we have a number of connections with him and his family over the years. Here we see him as the aggressive young man who came to Moline in 1856. And here we see him in his middle age. Although he was involved in a variety of business and civic endeavors, Mr. Keeter was best known for being a successful lumberman. He had run a sawmill located on the Mississippi River that ran from the foot of 17th Street to the foot of 21st Street. And an easy point of reference today is that if you go from the new Kone building to the old Kone building, that pretty much describes the area of land on which he had his sawmill. And to give you an idea of the extent of his operation, he had 30,000 acres of timberland in Wisconsin that provided the logs for the mill. So in a way, the big operation that he had here was really just the tip of the iceberg. Now here we see him, as I remember him, an old man living in his hotel, even though he still owned a fine house. Let me show you where the Keeter House was located. It would be at the corner of River Drive and 16th Street, just east of Ducky's and Subway. Except that 16th Street is no longer there. It's replaced with an overpass. Keeter's Hotel was just east of the overpass, where today there is a parking lot. Now, this next picture, taken in 1889, shows the people that worked in the Deere and Company main office. In the front row are key personnel of the firm. John Deere's son, Charles Deere, was the chief executive officer. Stephen Veely was the company secretary. Gilpin Moore, the inventor, was the shop manager. And my father, Charles Pope, was the office manager. Over the years, my father held other positions with the company, including head of the patents department, assistant accountant, and board member. My mother writes, Moline, Illinois, January 27th, 925 17th Street, old J.S. Keeter house. We moved into Mr. Keeter's old house. An interesting old place. I should tell you a little bit about it. If you could go back.
I'm sorry, I made an error.
Thank you. The original part of the house was built in 1869, and that's what you see on the right. Mr. Keeter had the addition on the left put on in 1876. The main part of the house, many of you will recognize as Italianate style. This style was very popular in the United States from about 1840 to 1885. Now, as the Catholic Church Diocese of Peoria has proclaimed a period of 2014 to 2015 as the year of Father Alleman, I should mention in passing that in an earlier house on this site in 1855, Father Alleman celebrated the first Catholic Mass in Moline. Now, back to the diary. My mother writes, February 10th, Henry just getting over the mumps. And then on March 13th, she writes, 6 and Sunday, earache and sore throat. Looks badly. Was up till after midnight putting wet sponges with hot water on Henry's left ear. Mother writes, September 13th. Today we bought the J.S. Keeter place, 925 17th Street. Well, this was actually the day that they made the deal. The actual sale took place at a later time. Now here's a family portrait that was taken downtown at Mangold Studio. That's me in the center, my brothers Gene and Charlie in front of me, and that's my little sister Helen in father's arms. My youngest brother Lawrence hadn't been born yet. Now notice the tree in the background with the hand-shaped branch sticking out. You'll see this in the next picture. This is a picture of father, my sister, and well, now you've seen the punchline. This does look familiar to some people, as it resembles, if you go on to the next slide, the scene from Butch Cassidy in the Sundance Kid. Now let's talk a little bit about the bicycle in the picture. It's not surprising that a photography studio would have a bicycle as a studio prop in 1891. There was a huge bicycle craze in the country at the time. What started it was the introduction of the safety bicycle that replaced the high wheel bicycle. Now, while the details are different, the safety bicycle looks a lot like the bikes we ride today. My father was a big bicycling fan, and he was said to have owned the first bicycle in Moline. The craze for bicycling is quite understandable. It was one of the best modes of personal transportation available at the time. Now, back to the diary. My mother writes, my little man seems so delicate, it distresses me. Is sick a great deal and looks so white and peaky. Now, I've shown you a few of the diary entries that deal with me being sick, and I'm stopping that with this one. The fact is that I was a sickly child, but the state of medicine at the time I was growing up played a big role in my illnesses. First, there were no inoculations to prevent childhood diseases. So it was easy to get sick and to get sick quite often. There were also no antibiotics available, so there were no antibiotics available. When a child got sick, it might take a long time for their body to fight the illness. Now, in the big picture, I was very fortunate. Many children died of childhood illnesses, but I survived. And as an adult, I was generally a healthy person. Now, here's a case where Mother's one sentence really downplays the event it describes. It says that I went to the World's Fair with Papa and Mama from June 19th to the 22nd inclusive. Now, this refers to our visit to the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. And while each World's Fair has its supporters, this is perhaps the best World's Fair ever. On the slide, you see an admission ticket. Price of admission was 50 cents. I'm going to pass around a book on the 1893 World's Fair. I can't do the fair
I noticed he spells
Justice
mono with two M's.
in just a few minutes.
Interesting. Oh, she spelled it that way.
We go on to the next slide, we'll see what was so great about this particular World's Fair. Well, this was a celebration of Columbus's voyage, the 400th anniversary of Columbus's voyage in 1492. In fact, this was the exposition held in 1893. It was a year late because of all the preparation that took place. There was also a desire to do something really special to celebrate Chicago's rebuilding after the Great Fire of 1871. Also, the 1899 Paris Exposition with its Eiffel Tower had been a great hit. They wanted to outdo that fair. And at the time, they had a lot to work with. There had been a great explosion of new science, technology, and exploration in recent years, but because most people had little access to world news other than what they read in the local newspaper, when they did go to the fair, they experienced literally thousands of things that they never even knew existed. And finally, the size of the fair was absolutely immense. There were 68,000 exhibits. Now, the centerpiece of the Chicago World Fair was, without question, the Ferris wheel. The fair planners were looking for a specific feature that would play the same role as the Eiffel Tower had played in the Paris Exposition. The first proposal in response to that was for a tower 500 feet taller than the Eiffel Tower. That idea, though, was quickly dismissed. Kind of a tired idea, just more of the same. They were looking for something novel, original, daring, and unique. Enter George Washington Gale Ferris, who was born in Galesburg. At the time, he was a young engineer working in Pittsburgh. He came up with the idea for a gigantic wheel on which people could ride. As no such structure had ever been built before, designing the wheel proved to be difficult. And on top of that, in 1892, the country was in the midst of a severe depression, so getting financial support wasn't easy either. But Ferris managed to obtain the necessary financing arrangements. So, Ferris has all the arrangements made. He goes to the exposition committee, well prepared, but they treat him like a crazy man. The committee doubted that such a structure could be built, and they were certain that it would be dangerous. Well, Ferris became known to the committee as the man with wheels in his head. But Ferris persisted and eventually was granted a concession to build the wheel. Now, I guess the committee eventually became used to the idea, Or maybe they simply came to the realization that there were no other reasonable proposals on the table. Now, the wheel itself was gigantic, 264 feet tall, 36 cars the size of buses, each capable of holding 60 passengers, giving a total capacity of 2,160 passengers. The wheel was capable of carrying 38,000 passengers each day. Now, because of the delays in granting Ferris his concession, the Ferris wheel didn't open to the public until June 21st. And we were there the day that it opened. Rides cost 50 cents,
38,000?
the same price as entry
That's
to the fair
$19,000
itself.
a day.
The 20-minute ride consisted of 2 rotations, the first one making 6 stops to take on passengers, and the second one, a single non-stop rotation that took 9 minutes. Now, riding the Ferris wheel was quite an experience. This slide shows the entrance to the cars. The entrance takes us right up under the structure. Seeing the wheel up close from underneath gives a very different appreciation of the enormous size of the wheel. We go up a stairway to a loading platform, and assistants load us onto one of the 6 cars that are at the platform. There's a conductor on each car, and the windows on each side are covered with a heavy screen. When the car is loaded, the doors at each end are locked, and a guard signals the operator that the car is ready. When all 6 cars are ready, the wheel starts to turn, and we go up a little bit, then stop for the next load of passengers. This is the view that we had of the inside of the wheel. After 2 more stops, we were at the top of the wheel. Now, you've probably flown in an airplane, so being high in the air isn't a big deal for you. But I've never experienced such a thing before. At the top, I could see the entire fairgrounds and the city of Chicago. And Father said that we were seeing the sights of Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, and Michigan. After the loading rotation, we went around once without any stops. Then we began making stops for unloading and taking on new passengers. Now, it's now 1894, and I'm now 10 years old. And my father's entrepreneurial instincts have kicked in. He resigned his position as office manager of Deere & Company to go into the real estate business. In 1895, my father becomes president and treasurer of the East Moline Land Company. His prior experience with railroads and manufacturing companies puts him in a good position to negotiate with them. Now, once they had things organized, the East Moline Land Company advertised for a grand opening with a free barbecue feast and free music. Huge crowds enjoyed the free food and music, but only 1 lot sold. And that went for a disappointing $75. A long time before sales picked up. After the fiasco big barbecue, the East Moline Land Company got support from Charles Deere and German Keeter. Keeter told them, "Boys, you have a good thing. If I had the money I once had, I would back you to the limit. But now I have only $600, and here it is. I know you are hard up and need it, and I wish you would take it." Now, back to the diary. It's now 1896, and I'm 12 years old. My grandmother Pope and my Aunt Dee Dee were visiting us for 8 weeks, and Grandma treated us to an all-day trip to Black Hawk Watchtower Amusement Park in Rock Island. Nowadays, this is officially called the Black Hawk State Historic Site, You probably know it as just Black Hawk Park. This place has had many changes over the years. Around 1750, this was a Sauk village, and by 1826, there were an estimated 4,800 Sauk living in and around Saukanduk. From 1882 to 1927, the site was the Watchtower Amusement Park, and that's what we went to. And today, the historic site includes the Watchtower Lodge, the Halberg Indian Museum, and Singing Bird Center. Now, the Watchtower Amusement Park was what was known as an end-of-the-line park, and you'll find those across the United States. Prospect Park, for example, was also an end-of-the-line park. The idea was that these parks would be built away from the city at the end of the streetcar line, and on weekends, people would take the streetcar to the park for relaxation and entertainment. And here we see the streetcar that ran to Watchtower during the season. It made a run every 10 minutes. Now, this is a view from the Rock River showing the Watchtower Inn on the bluff. That's up here on the right. Unfortunately, this building burned down on July 3rd prior to our visit. On the lower left of the picture, and this isn't very clear, you can see one of the shoot-the-chute boats splashing down into the Rock River. Now, here's a picture of the merry-go-round. Actually, my favorite entertainment here was the shooting gallery, but that wasn't very photogenic, so I couldn't find any pictures to show you. Now, here's the big deal attraction at Watchtower, Shoot the Chutes. This was invented by J.P. Newberg of Rock Island in 1884, and the chutes at Watchtower was the first of its kind. Let me tell you how it worked. First, the ride cost 10 cents. Would climb into a flat-bottom boat at the top of the greased wooden slide and sit down. Kind of scary to look down the slide, which was said to be 500 feet long. There was a conductor on the boat who would stand up for the entire ride. The boat would be released and would start down the slide, going faster and faster. And then as we approached the water of the Rock River, it felt like we were going to dive right into the water. But just as we reached the bottom of the slide, the bow would lift up a little and would hit the water. And would be going so fast that the boat would skip like a stone on water. The boat would continue gliding in the water until it came to a stop. The conductor would then pull the boat back to the chute and hook the boat to an electrically powered cable that would pull the boat back up to the top of the chute with us still in it. Now, this was an exciting ride, and it's not surprising that slides like this were soon being built throughout the country. Some with wooden chutes like the one at Watchtower, others with flumes that house flowing water. Now, let's go back to the diary again. Mother writes, Henry, Jean, and Charlie have been selling popcorn for 2 Saturdays. They've made $1.30. And then on